What makes a man? When I ask myself that question, I have to be honest. Although I'm an adult male with all the physical equipment, that does not make me a man. My 2-year-old grandson possesses the same equipment. So I came to the conclusion that the only expert on the matter was the one who created man. That is God. So my quest was now to be God's man, as he intended, not the man that the world recommended. My quest led me to Genesis 2. After God had formed man from the dust and breathed into him his spirit, man was now alive. God also participated in the development or building up of the man. We see in verse 15, God took the man, put him in the garden to work it and to take care of it. God intended for his man to exercise stewardship. In verse 19 and 20, we see God bringing the animals to the man, that he may see them with his mind's eye, and the result expressed from his mouth. God intended his man to exercise leadership. And in verse 20, after the man exercises leadership, God concludes he is ready for headship. So God makes him a helper. I want to share all three facets of God's man, but at this time we will focus on God's man as the steward. What is a steward? A steward is someone who is in charge of someone else's goods or property. In this case, God's man is in charge of God's property. God's man's first realization is that God owns everything. The Psalm states, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it." God's man knows that the house he lives in belongs to God, the car he drives or the bike he rides belongs to God, the woman he married, even though she has his last name, she too belongs to God. The last thing God's man knows is he owns nothing. It's simple math. What's left after you subtract everything from anything? The answer is no thing. As we look deeper into God's man, the steward, we see three major characteristics or abilities that God's man must develop and exercise. God's man, the steward, is responsible. He is accountable and he is reliable. First, God's man is responsible. He has matured to the point where God can entrust him with his goods. He does not blame others for his failures and gives credit to those who are involved in his success. Second, God's man, the steward, is accountable. He does not make excuses. He stands ready to give an answer to the choices and actions. And thirdly, God's man, the steward, is reliable or faithful. God can entrust his valuable goods to him because of his history of care. Jesus illustrates in Matthew 25 these three characteristics of God's man, the steward. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a man going on a long journey who calls his servants and entrusts to them his wealth. We can see these men are challenged to exercise responsibility. The master placed into their care his valuables. The master has given them power over his valuables to properly use, misuse, or abuse. Later in the parable, Jesus says, after some time, the master returned and settled accounts with his servants. God's man, the steward, knows he is subject to give an answer to the master of his choices and deeds concerning the master's goods. In fact, the Apostle Paul writes, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ." Thirdly, Jesus illustrates God's man, the steward, is reliable or faithful. We see two of the three servants are faithful because of their history of reliability. With a few things, he puts in their care many things. God's man's history of reliability indicates he can be entrusted with even more. At the conclusion of the parable, there was one servant that hid the master's money in the ground. He was condemned. The master called him wicked and lazy. He called him wicked because his lack of stewardship caused more work for the master and the other servants. He simply refused to do his part. He called him lazy because he was unwilling to work. God does not tolerate the man that is unwilling to work. We must remember, in the garden, the first charge to the man was to work. If he refuses to work, he would be disobedient. Women of God, if a man is unwilling to work or refuses to work, this is a sign he may not belong to God. So brothers, are you willing to be God's man? Beginning as the master's steward, recognizing that everything belongs to God? Are you responsible? Are you accountable? And are you reliable?